Welcome to Reading the Gospels Together, and today we're in part 2 of John chapter 9, and we've just witnessed the amazing miracle of the healing of the man blind from birth, but as so often, no good deed is to go unpunished. Remember, though, the Pharisees are already pretty agitated over what Jesus had said and done in chapters 7 and 8. They were at the point of killing him. And now this. It's small wonder that they're upset, particularly since they had warned Jesus in strongest terms about healing on the Sabbath as he had done back in chapter 5 at the Pool of Bethesda. So listen as we resume chapter 9 at verse 13. We read, "Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it, so he told them, 'He put the mud over my eyes, and when I washed it away, I could see.' Some of the Pharisees said, 'This man Jesus is not from God, for he's working on the Sabbath.' Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs?" So there was deep division of opinion among them. Now, the Pharisees, astonishingly, are once again more concerned with the timing of the miracle than with the result of the miracle. And while emergency medical care is permissible on the Sabbath, this man's condition was hardly new, but had been permanent. That Jesus would choose to perform this miracle on the Sabbath, as with the man at Bethesda who'd been sick for 38 years, well, that was just viewed as a provocation of the temple laws. So the questioning continues. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who'd been blind and demanded, "What's your opinion about this man who healed you?" The man replied, "I think he must be a prophet." The Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man had been born blind and could now see, so they called in his parents. They asked them, "Is this your son? Was he born blind? And if so, how can he now see?" His parents replied, "We know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself." His parents said this, we read, because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why the man's parents said, "He's old enough. Ask him." Thanks a lot, Mom and Dad. You know, the man's parents were brought in. They're evasive. They don't want to get thrown out. Despite this wonderful miracle which saved restored the sight of their son, they're in trouble and they're nervous. Imagine if a Presbyterian minister or an elder publicly identified a particular preacher or politician, God forbid, as the second coming of Christ. Well, problems would arise. We would want to disassociate ourselves from that person, particularly if that preacher or politician threatened the foundational concepts of the Presbyterian Church. So the interrogation continues. For the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, "God should get glory for this because we know this man Jesus is a sinner." "I don't know whether he's a sinner," the man replied, "but I know this, I was blind and now I see." "But what did he do?" they asked. "How did he heal you?" "Look," the man exclaimed, "I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" "You were born a total sinner," they answered the healed man. "Are you trying to teach us?" And they threw him out of the synagogue. Well, the story begins to devolve into high comedy at the Pharisees' expense. Faced with having to acknowledge the healing, they now change tactic. The man should shut up about Jesus and give credit for the healing to God. Now the man, a simple, formerly blind beggar, turns the tables on the Pharisees, besting them in theological debate. Doubtless this was a strong model for John's community of faith, the first to read this gospel. They would have been encouraged by the man. His eyes had been opened in more ways than one, but the Pharisees are revealed to be truly spiritually blind. Now, a really nice part of the story. Remember how after the man had been healed at the Pool of Bethesda, Jesus sought him out, Jesus found the guy? He does the same again here, but with a far more positive result. This starts at verse 35. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" It's one of the titles Jesus used for himself, a Jewish title for the Messiah. The man answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." "You have seen him," Jesus said, And he's speaking to you. I love that. You've seen him. Now that you can see me. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said, and he worshiped Jesus. Then Jesus told him, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, like the blind man, and to show those who think they see that they're blind, like the Pharisees. It's a wonderful moment demonstrating the compassion of Jesus, who actively follows up on the miracle, revealing himself to be the Messiah and giving the man an opportunity to express his faith in Jesus. Pharisees aren't done, though. Some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, Are you saying we're blind? If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, Jesus replied. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see. The Pharisees have all they need to know to recognize Jesus as the Messiah. They have even this undeniable miracle of the man born blind. Yet their rejection continues. Well, we have everything we need to understand who Jesus is. Do we see? Do we hear? How can we tell if we are among the truly seeing and hearing, and not just those who are guilty because we claim we can see? Well, John tells us in a follow-up, which is one of his letters to his churches, 1 John chapter 2, verses 7 and 11, he writes this. If anyone claims I am living in the light but hates a fellow believer, writes John, that person is still living in darkness. Anyone who loves a fellow believer is living in the light and does not cause others to stumble. But anyone who hates a fellow believer is still living and walking in darkness. Such a person does not know the way to go, having been blinded by the darkness. So, are you walking in the light? Well, another way to answer this question is, are you living in love? Let's be sure that we not only claim to believe, but that we live and love as though we do. Next time, it's John chapter 10 for perhaps the most well-known of the I am sayings of Jesus, and for yet another trip to Jerusalem for yet another feast. We'll see you then.